Hello, I'm Shanine. Welcome to the Chit Chat Podcast, where we explore life through soulful conversation. I'm joined today by Phil McManus, and we're going to be exploring the marine conservation work that he does with the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Hello, welcome to this episode of the Chit Chat Podcast, and I'm joined today by Phil McManus, who works with an organisation called Sea Shepherd that do marine conservation work and work to save the oceans in lots of different ways. So I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with Phil to hear more about the work that he does with Sea Shepherd and also about his perspective and views on animal cruelty and veganism and doing what we can as human beings to help support animals to live happy, free lives. So thank you so much for joining me, Phil.
You're welcome.
It's lovely to have you on the podcast. And I know that you and I have had a conversation before on the last podcast that I recorded, but that was quite a few years ago now. And I know that you're still heavily involved in the work that Sea Shepherd do. So it'd be lovely to first hear more about the organisation as a whole and your involvement with them kind of from when we last spoke up until now.
Right. There's a lot. So
good.
So first of all, Sea Shepherd in the UK is no longer Sea Shepherd.
Right.
First of all, so Sea Shepherd's become, since we last spoke, a little bit fragmented. So Sea Shepherd, the organisation, still exists, but some countries have moved away from Sea Shepherd and we're now part of what's called the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. So Sea Shepherd UK is now Captain Paul Watson Foundation. So that's kind of come about from, what's the best way to term it? Kind of some divisions that kind of arose within the organisation itself, with the original founder, Paul Watson, no longer being part of the organisation, and kind of people that were loyal to Paul, if you like, and his ethics have become the Paul Watson Foundation, and Sea Shepherd, you know, the kind of the organisation, people that are loyal to the organisation are kind of on one side of the fence and we're now on the other. So it's kind of caused quite a lot of controversy, and there's been a lot of back and forth with people online and things like that. But at the end of the day, you know, Sea Shepherd are still doing an admirable job, as are the Paul Watson Foundation, and, you know, the way I see it, people that are part of Sea Shepherd should support the Paul Watson Foundation and vice versa. You know, there's still good work being done on both sides. So in terms of what that means for me, since I last spoke to you, I've taken on more hats, basically. So I've been the North East Regional Coordinator for Sea Shepherd now, the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. So I'm still the North East Coordinator for that. So I, along with another girl called Sarah, look after all the going-ons in the North East of the UK, looking after the volunteers, looking for work that might need to be done, etc. But since then as well, one of the other hats I've had to don is I've also taken on the title, along with a couple of others, of being dive coordinator. So all the scuba diving activities that are done within Sea Shepherd UK, me and another team of another 3 people are kind of looking after all that as well. So we've got lots of things in the pipeline, lots of things still going on at the minute. So I spoke to you about the GhostNet campaign last time I spoke to you. That's still going on. There's still lots of work to be done. We're predominantly working kind of like in the northeast of the UK at the minute. But next year we're looking to expand that to a countrywide initiative. So lots to do and lots being done.
Yeah. Brilliant. I mean, it's always interesting and also, I guess, difficult when organisations break down and change And I'm glad that the work that Sea Shepherd UK were doing is still continuing on, even under a different name and potentially a different sort of leadership. But it's good to see that that conservation work is still happening in some fashion. So it'd be good to know, like, practically, if we break down like what you actually do, what kind of tasks do you carry out as a part of your role?
So it varies hugely. So, I mean, the structure of the organisation, what's now the Captain Paul Watson Foundation UK, is exactly the same as it was under Sea Shepherd. It's the same people doing the same work, just with a different name. We've still got, all the work that Sea Shepherd UK has done. We still claim all that as our history and things like that. So, same people doing the same thing. So, I mean, I do some almost like admin duties, if you like. So I do a lot of like onboarding of new volunteers and inducting new volunteers, giving them the do's and don'ts, and kind of taking on a bit of a mentor role. But in addition to that, I skipper one of the vessels. I do some diving for Sea Shepherd UK, and the majority of the diving that we do tends to be around recovering what's called ghost gear, which is lost and discarded fishing gear, whether that be nets or rope or lobster pots, this kind of thing. We get as much of that out of the ocean as we can. It's difficult because we're only taking out a fraction of realistically what goes in, but we're not the only organisation doing it. There's other organisations doing it as well. So we do have kind of like a coalition between us all, and we all support each other. And so I mean, the thing is with fishing gear is it's when it's manufactured with one purpose, and that's to trap, ensnare, and kill marine wildlife. And whether or not it's attached to a fishing vessel or not makes no difference as to whether or not that's the inevitable outcome. So this stuff needs removing. And the other side to it as well is, like a lot of other things in the times that we live in, things that were made from plastic. So back in the 40s, 50s, when commercial fishing really started to ramp up, a lot of the nets back then were cotton and hemp. So if they were lost, within a few years, they were gone. Whereas the nets that people use now and the monofilaments that people use now, hundreds of years potentially to degrade. We've seen nets getting pulled out that have probably been down for 30 and 40 years, and you could literally rinse them off and use them again. So yeah, that's kind of the vast majority of work that we're doing at the minute. But I've got other stuff in the pipeline. So I'm going to Iceland in September because it's one of the last countries that's still commercially whales. We've also got crew on the ground in the Faroe Islands at the minute, again, because they drive hunt dolphins. And then there's other stuff in the pipeline as well. So potentially looking at doing some work with seals in Scotland coming up soon. So much to do.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're doing some incredible and really valuable work as well. I had no idea that the materials that people use to make nets has changed, and how kind of damaging the impact of that change is for marine wildlife today compared to how bad it will have been for them, 30 years ago. That's really interesting to know. And, even if there's a couple of people doing what they can to try and reduce the amount of waste that's in the oceans, it's better than nobody at all doing it. So I think you're doing an incredibly valuable job. I wonder what you think, or what you know about the aim of the organisation is. What is the long-term goal for the Captain Paul Watson organisation?
Ultimately, I think the ultimate aim would be to get into a position where, through education and government intervention, we get to a point where the oceans are given time to just rest and recover. That's kind of like ultimately the aim. The oceans are massively overexploited, and being a scuba diver in the last 10 years, when I dive some sites that I might have dived 10 years ago, there's a marked difference in the amount of life and the coral and things like that, and how it's bleaching and dying off. So ultimately, the aim of the organisation is to get to a point where the oceans are no longer exploited and marine life can find its balance again, and it can have time to breathe, and the way we kind of see it is one fish being taken out of the ocean, the way things are, is one fish too many, simple as that, really.
Yeah. It's organic, isn't it? The ocean, it functions like any other natural creature. If it's abused, it needs time to recover and get back to its kind of natural sense of vitality, I guess. So if the oceans have been abused by human activity, it's understandable that what's needed is actually for us as human beings to just back off and let the ocean heal itself back to how it should be. So what motivates you as an individual to commit yourself to this cause? What is it that drives you to want to keep engaging with this organisation and doing this kind of work?
Well, I think it's for what I've always been a bit of a water baby ever since I was a child. I've always been fascinated with the ocean, and a lot of people do say to me, why are you wanting to save the ocean when there's so many terrestrial animals and things that need help? And my argument to that is we live on a blue planet realistically and not a green one, and without the blue there's no green. So when we talk about things like when you think about oxygen production, and people always talk about the Amazon rainforest and they talk about trees, the reality of it is that the vast majority of oxygen that's produced that we breathe in is produced by ocean-borne plant life rather than terrestrial plant life. And for me, just because the ocean's always something I have a real affinity with, and I kind of see it as the life support of the planet, and I see people just the reckless abandon at which that's been destroyed quite literally breaks my heart, and the earth is kind of like our mother, isn't it? And we're literally destroying our mother, and it's just, you've got one planet, and when you just see, and it's not just individuals, individuals obviously play a big part in it, but the way you see, the government turning the back on the environment for short-term gain and things like that, I kind of feel it's my duty and responsibility to stand up and be like, not on my watch, and do what I can to try and stop that happening. And that's one of the things I love about being part of an organisation like the Captain Paul Watson Foundation, is that you're surrounded by like-minded people, and there's a bit of a thing in society, isn't there, where, if somebody's environmentally conscious or somebody, wants to do their bit for the planet, it's ridiculed to an extent. I had it a little bit at work today, because I'm the office vegan, and it's kind of like, we had a bit of a fuddle today for somebody that was leaving, and they all went out and got pizzas, and they were like, there's some grass outside, Phil, you can have that, and it's like, yeah. And you just hear the kind of same thing, but that kind of ridicule of it, as much as I'm very, very used to it, I think is just endemic of the society that we live in. And it's that kind of attitude and that kind of wanting to take responsibility of the planet is kind of poked fun at a little bit. And I think that's really sad, and I understand that people think, well, one person can't make a difference. That couldn't be further from the truth. Everybody can make a difference. The Captain Paul Watson Foundation, and formerly Sea Shepherd, is an organisation of just, a couple of thousand people, but the work they do is absolutely phenomenal. So everybody can make that little bit of a difference.
I think it's such a good point, and if every person did something, that's a lot of things,
Absolutely,
isn't it?
yeah.
It's like 7 billion
Exactly.
changes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to amount to something. I think you're absolutely right. When we have that attitude of us as individuals have absolutely no power, so there's no point in us making positive changes or doing things that are going to help the environment, that's when nothing really happens. if each person just does what they can in their own life to make things better and makes positive changes where they can, add that up over each person doing that, that's going to be a lot of change. So absolutely agree with that. And, just reflecting on what you said about how you feel like you're mocked for wanting to make a positive difference. I can relate to that as well, and often feel in conversations with people when I talk about myself as a vegan, or if I go out for dinner and have to ask what the vegan options are, I often feel like embarrassed about that, like I'm being inconvenient for everybody else. And I think that's something that we as vegans have to kind of get over ourselves a little bit and just accept that we are making the changes that we can make. And if other people have an issue with that, that's not something that we as individuals have to take on board or feed into. But I do understand how frustrating it can be when you're trying to do something positive and you feel a lack of support. And it's almost like people don't see for themselves the damage that those actions of continuing to eat meat and destroying the oceans and destroying the environment are having on their own life. Like, they don't see the damage that that's causing, and that is sad, really. So I think it's lovely that you have an insight into that, and you for yourself can see actually the actions that I take as an individual have an impact, and I have the power and the control to have a positive impact on life, in whatever way I can. And you're absolutely stepping into that role and doing what you can to make a positive difference. That's brilliant. And I hope that you continue to find what you need to keep doing that, because it's inspiring for other people as well. And also it's going to be making a difference for the animals' lives that you touch, the animals' lives that you help and support. So I wonder if you would kind of explore with me how you want to develop in this path for yourself. So at the moment, you're doing your work with the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. What do you see as your kind of future path as an animal activist, doing this kind of marine conservation work? Where do you want to see yourself heading in the future with this?
I mean, in terms of kind of where I see myself going in the future, I'm not really looking for any kind of almost like promotion, but probably not the right word within the organisation for myself. I kind of think I've got probably as far as I can go within the organisation. What I'd like to see is for the organisation to grow. So and it has done. So I've been in Captain Paul Watson Foundation and Sea Shepherd UK now for 9 years, and in that 9 years, it's grown massively to the point where branding and the logo is starting to get recognised, and you see it more on TV, and we get a lot of celebrity endorsement and that kind of thing. So the organisation has grown lots in that time, and I'd just like to see that continue. I think I would like to see more and more people joining, more important people getting involved, because the great thing about the organisation is we're not particularly shouty about what we do. We just do great work, and we're very good at finding incredibly dedicated people. So some of the people that I work quite closely with are without a doubt family to me. There's a few especially. So the other coordinators that I run the dive campaign with, so like Luke, Mark and Louise and some others that have been in the organisation for a while, they're like family. We see each other like nearly every weekend, or if not every other weekend. We're always planning stuff, and we just see the world the same way. And it's so refreshing when you've been at work all week with people that don't see the world the way you do, and then you see these people and it's almost like you can breathe again, and it's fantastic. And I do think, more and more people are starting to get on board with the idea of, that everybody has a responsibility for their own impact on the planet, which is great. But we're still not there yet, to the point where we're treating the environment with respect. So I'd like to see the organisation get to a point where, everyone's heard of us, everybody understands the cause, and that kind of almost, I'd like to see society to get to a point where that kind of like mocking of environmentalism and veganism and all the things that go with it is not something that's encouraged by the media and things like that. I'd like to get to a point where people see it as the right thing to do and they have no fear in admitting that that's what they want to do, in terms of how they will be reacted to. I mean, I get it within, my own family, my own friendship groups of people that aren't that. And you just kind of get to a point where it's a bit like water for ducks back. And there's kind of a lot of people that are always talking about, oh, how do you know if somebody's vegan? They'll tell you. It's kind of like you hear it all the time. But what omnivores don't realise is that we see advertisements for dead animals and that industry everywhere that we look. So it's not us that are shouting about what we do, it's everyone else, but we're the ones that apparently are the vocal ones that will always tell you our point of view, whereas we live in a society where animal exploitation and animal cruelty is the norm. And I'd like to see a time when animal exploitation or somebody who partakes in animal exploitation is seen almost the way now like a smoker is. So like 20, 30 years ago, nearly everybody smoked. It was a bit of a cool thing to do. But now to see somebody just light up a cigarette is a bit of an odd thing. It's a little bit like, oh, that's a bit of a dirty habit. I'd like to see us get to that point, but with the animal agriculture industry, that if somebody partakes in it, it's a bit like, ooh, I don't want to get involved with that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Like I totally see where you're going with that. Like eating animals is kind of against what the cultural norm is. Like getting to a point where it's like, yeah, oh, eating animals, why would you do that? It's so weird.
and it's kind of funny that I think it's intrinsic in all of us that it's wrong. And I think the first time I ever realised this is barbaric was, and this is a really random time and place to realise that it's barbaric. I'd been taken by my granddad to the cinema to go see the old Masters of the Universe movie, which was like the He-Man movie with Dolph Lundgren years ago. And there's a scene in that where they come from this other planet and they end up on Earth. And they're trying to find something to eat and they stumble on like a chicken joint and they're kind of eating bits out of the bin. And one of the characters in the film says, "What are these little white sticks?" And somebody else says, "Oh, they're bones." And they're like, "Oh my God, this planet is barbaric." And that was the first point I ever thought, actually, yeah. And I was only young. I must have only been about 6 or 7. But that was the first point I kind of thought, you know what, yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? It's bone. And kind of, people often think that we are natural carnivores and you see all these memes and anti-vegan kind of stuff about, we've got canines and we've got this and we've got that. But if you break it down, no, none of that stands up. So first of all, we don't really have canines, do we? I mean, if you look at a tiger or a wolf or something that isn't a natural carnivore's teeth, our teeth are nothing like that. The reason we've got canines realistically is probably more likely to get through skin of fruit and things like that. And we have molars that are designed to grind food down, whereas a natural carnivore would chomp. You wouldn't ever see a lion or a wolf moving its jaw side to side to grind down its food because it physically cannot do that. Whereas if you look at, a sheep or a cow, they have a very similar chewing motion to us. And then when you do swallow the food, our intestines are set up much more like a sheep or a cow's than they are a lion or a wolf's. And our body is just naturally designed to process that kind of food, and people often think that we've evolved to be this apex predator. And it's like, I often say to people, do you honestly think if you were in a field with the tools that God gave you, as in naked in a field, and there was you and a cow, you could bring that cow down and eat it? Absolutely no chance. And yeah, but some people kind of get your point, and other people are just don't want to hear it, do they? So when you hear all the time that we're supposed to be this top of the food chain, carnivorous super species, and we almost dissociate ourselves from the rest of the animal kingdom and put ourselves on this pedestal. But that, in reality, isn't the truth. I say to people all the time that humanity needs to stop thinking ego, and start thinking eco, because we always put ourselves as almost as if we're not part of the animal kingdom. We're above, almost like we've transcended that, and we haven't. Everything else in the world, even animals that do eat meat only consume what they need, whereas we don't. The process that we have for producing meat is barbaric, unnecessarily wasteful, cruel, and there's no other animal on the planet that's like that. Just us.
I think you made a key point about it being disassociation from the rest of the natural world, and I think that's the only way that we can ever justify the way in which we treat animals now, because we don't see ourselves as connected to them in a way that we are naturally. We are all a part of nature. We're all connected. But the only way that you can ever abuse something is if you don't see it as the same as yourself, if you see it as less than you. And I think it's that disassociation that creates the justification for treating animals in the way that we do. And also this idea, there's kind of a genuine point of concern raised about survival. But even just based on my own experience, I think I'm about 4.5 years vegan now. I'm still alive. I can still go to the gym and exercise. I don't have any nutritional deficiencies. So I think even that argument's becoming really tenuous now, that we need meat to survive. There are ways that we can live in harmony with nature. There are ways we can live in harmony with the rest of the animal world. We don't have to abuse and, treat them like they don't deserve to have a life of their own and an experience of life of their own. So I think, that's an interesting point about the disassociation, because for me, that explains why we do it still, because we've just lost that sense of we're all connected, we're all a part of the same ecosystem, we're not better than any of the other animals that exist.
Absolutely not. I mean, if you think about we often talk about, and you often hear on TV a lot of talk about, if you're in this almost like tapestry, probably like almost like a wall, that the ecosystem is a wall, and if you take out a keystone, everything else would crumble. And I think with a lot of species, that's true. If you take humans out of the equation, everything else would thrive, wouldn't it? Whereas, if you take bees out of the equation, everything really does come tumbling down. Take us out of the equation and everything would just thrive, And we're incredibly lucky, aren't we, to be born Homo sapien, if you like, because we are so intelligent and we do have a lot of skills that other animals don't have in terms of kind of like cognition and things like that. But in terms of this ego that our species has, it's just so destructive, and it really is our Achilles heel, and I really do think it will be the eventual downfall of our species. I think we're just very, very naturally as a species self-destructive. You see it, with all the wars that go on, and how we're literally fighting about imaginary lines in the sand, and It's absolutely crazy, and I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword being human, isn't it? You're kind of very blessed in some ways and cursed in some others, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's sad that we've lost an ability to be able to live in harmony with the rest of life and to not be a destructive force on the planet. I like to think from my own optimistic perspective that we have a potential to get back to that way of life. And I think that there are some human beings that do demonstrate that it is possible to live in harmony with your environment and to only use what you need, and to have that sense of being one with nature. But I think as a wider society, especially in kind of Western culture, I think we have lost sight of that. And without making it political, I do think capitalism has a lot to blame for it, that kind of, just unrestricted growth, economic growth, using resources just for the sake of making a profit. I think that ideology has really damaged and created a lot of environmental damage over the years. But I also would like to think that there is a part of us that has a memory of what it is like to live in tune with nature, and that there is a way that we can live in harmony. I don't think we've lost that, because we have that animal brain inside of us still. It's still a part of who we are. And I think we've just lost sight of it somewhere. And I think if we can find a way of reminding other human beings, like, there is a way that you can live in harmony with the rest of nature, and that people remember how nice that is and how fulfilling it is to live a life like that, I think we can find that balance of being able to be a presence on the planet and not destructive to it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And, the thing about unrestricted growth and things like that, there's just the powers that be are just so concerned about filling their pockets now and not worrying about what's going to happen in 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And it's just so incredibly short-sighted. And it's almost like, well, it's the next generation that's going to suffer. That kind of attitude, I think, is a big part of the problem. And like you say, when the government are, giving out licenses for new coal mines and new coal power stations and all this kind of thing, and it's all about money, it's not about the environment. And we are quite literally on this tipping point now, aren't we, of kind of like, we're at that point where if we go much further, there's not really going to be any comeback, and we're going to pass that 1.5 degree mark that is talked about so much, and we are quite literally standing on the edge of the cliff at the minute. And I think, there is a possibility to pull it back, but it kind of sometimes feels like it's 1% of the people trying to hold 99% of the people back from jumping over that cliff, and we just need it to be the 99% of the people that are holding the 1% back, if you know what I mean. So we just need to get more and more people aware of kind of what's going on. And I think there is a lot more awareness now, and I think more and more people are waking up to it. And, you only have to look at how easy it is now to just, for example, go into a supermarket and get plant-based food and things like that, and how many more environmental organisations are popping up, and which is obviously a great thing. Just for me, the biggest stumbling block is that kind of, there's still that stigma of being part of an organisation like that, and we just need to kind of get people into a place where they want to stand up and say, actually, this needs to stop, and I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And that, for me, happened a bit like a light switch, like 10, 12 years ago, that I just kind of decided, what on earth is going on? You kind of, if you just look at it a little bit objectively and kind of take off, your human hat, if you like, and look at it from an ecological perspective, and not think about your own future, think about the future of everyone. And a lot of people, say to me, why are you trying to protect the animals and why are you trying to protect the environment when there's human rights atrocities going on all over the world? And it's kind of like, we're one species out of hundreds of thousands, number one. But two, trying to save the planet and trying to save the environment is ultimately about saving humanity. And that's kind of what it all comes down to. We are trying to protect animals and protect the planet, and we're doing that because we believe that we're cruel and the behaviour is abhorrent. But ultimately, it all links into, if all this over here survives, then we will survive, and that's kind of, it's all intrinsically linked, isn't it? It's all one and the same fight,
Absolutely. And I also think on that, why choose one cause over the other? I think that you are naturally drawn towards what you want to speak out and fight for and work towards. I think every individual has something that they feel passionate about, and I don't think you ever need to justify that to anyone personally. I think if that's what you feel called to do, that's absolutely fine. There are some people that will feel called towards speaking out about human rights atrocities.
Absolutely.
There are some people that will feel called towards speaking out against child abuse. There are some people that will feel called to speak out about social justice issues. Each individual will have their own calling on what they want to improve and make better for the future. And if that's your calling, that's your calling. I don't even think you need to justify it in any way. But at the same time, I totally get where you're coming from. Like, if we are working towards saving the environment and saving the animals, ultimately we're creating a better environment for ourselves to live in.
Yeah.
It's like we're cleaning up the house, isn't
Exactly.
it?
Yeah.
If you want to live in a shit tip, you're ultimately going to get unhealthy. You're not going to feel good. You're going to look around, you're not going to feel happy at what you see. But if you clean your house, you're like, this is great. The air's clean, the water's clean, everything's good. We are creating a better environment for ourselves, and we're ultimately going to benefit from that as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've said to quite a lot of people, that everybody doesn't have to pull in the same direction as long as it's in the direction of good, and that's kind of the way that I see it. And, there's enough people on the planet to solve all the world's problems,
Absolutely.
So, if somebody says to me, why aren't you standing up for human rights? It's kind of like, are you standing up for them? And the other thing is, do you know what? If you had been bred to be killed at 3 years old, a tiny percentage of your expected lifespan, and you were going to be put in a cage and gassed, I'd stand up for you. You know what I mean? If you were going to be, milked for 15 years of your life to the point where you collapse and then you're slaughtered because I would stand up for you, And it's not necessarily about the species. It's not about any particular country, because that's something else, that formerly Sea Shepherd, now Captain Paul Watson Foundation, get accused of, is that we go to other countries and we tell them what to do. It's not about the territory it's happening in, it's about the act. If the UK started to wail tomorrow, you better believe that we'd be standing there and opposing it. It's not about where it is, it's not about the species. Ultimately, it all comes down to an act. And it's kind of, if I think that act is wrong and I think it's cruel and unnecessary, then I'll stand up and say that I think it's cruel and unnecessary. And the environmental benefits that come with that are kind of the icing on the cake, aren't they, at the end of the day?
Absolutely. What do you think is the change that matters for each individual that they can do that you think would make a positive difference?
The easiest way would be to cut out meat and dairy. That's the easiest way you can do it, because at the end of the day, the animal agriculture industry is like any other business. It's supply and demand, isn't it? If there's no demand, there's no supply. Simple as that. So straight away, you cut out all that cruelty and you cut out the absolutely unbelievable things that go on inside those slaughterhouses. Animals wouldn't be exploited for the lactations and the secretions and whatever else that people, consume. That would all fall by the wayside. So ultimately, that's the easiest way to make a positive impact, or just reducing. You know what I mean? If I had £1 for every time somebody said to me, "I can't live without cheese," it's kind of like, do everything else. Do everything else. If you can cut out cheese, fantastic. But even if you're only 75% of the way to the goal, to the line, to the end, if everybody was 75% the way to the end, the world would be able to breathe. It'd have a bit of rest, time to rest. I would love the whole world to become vegan overnight. Is that realistic? It's not, is it? So I would absolutely love that to happen. So what I would love to see people do is just cut out meat and dairy, because not only is the cruelty side of it taken care of, but the massive environmental impact is taken care of. When you have all these organisations that are trying to be carbon neutral, and animal agriculture is up there with the big ones, and it's all down to a choice, isn't it? When you go into that supermarket, whatever aisle you decide to walk down is ultimately a choice. And if you decide to go down that meat aisle, you're choosing to support an industry that is inherently cruel, inherently unnecessary, and has a catastrophic impact on the planet. And it's as simple as that. If you just decided to walk in another direction to the plant-based section, then and if you go vegan and you don't necessarily see the impact of it, but because it is supply and demand, less animals are bred to be slaughtered, less animals have to go through that horrific process. And if you save the life of one animal, then quite literally it is everything to the animal, isn't it? For that animal to still be alive because you went to aisle 16 instead of aisle 12. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's a brilliant suggestion. And I think one that's achievable as well, because it's not about saying you have to change your entire life. It's just making a few different choices.
It is.
A couple of times a week when you go to the supermarket.
Yeah.
And I also think that the ripple effect of that could be huge, because from an economic perspective, capitalism has no loyalty.
Absolutely.
So if people stop buying meat and people start buying plant-based products, that's where they're going to start to invest.
They're
not going to stay loyal to the animal agriculture, because that's what we've always done. They're going to follow where people are spending their money. So if people are spending more money on plant-based products, that's where the investment's going to start going, and it becomes then a kind of ripple effect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That grows and grows.
And and people talk all the time about, about all these farmers that are going to get put out of business, and it's like, well, why didn't that farmer stop rearing cattle and start growing food? So these farmers wouldn't be out of a job. They would literally just need to reshape their business model. Simple as that. And it's such a simple change to make, but because we live in this society where every other advert on TV is McDonald's or it's KFC, or if it's it's something along those lines, and that food is kind of that quick fix kind of food is almost idolized, and put on a pedestal, and that's what people do. You hear it when you go to work. It's like, I've stopped up for a McDonald's breakfast or blah 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 blah. And it's just as simple as just saying, actually, no, I don't want to partake in that industry anymore. And it doesn't take a genius to just Google what goes on inside a slaughterhouse. It doesn't, it takes you 2 minutes to do that little bit of research to see where your food comes from. And there's a reason why slaughterhouses don't have windows, because if you saw what went on inside, it'd put you off your food. And, humans generally, when they see the sight of blood and guts of an animal, are put off by it. But if that was your food, you wouldn't have this natural repulsion to seeing the blood and the guts of the animal. We've just been programmed since being an infant that, meat is what we need, and it just isn't. It really isn't. I mean, I'm 10 years in, and like you say, I'm still alive. I've not died of, B12 deficiency or, I'm still here, so, and, yeah, it is all down to that. I think, like you said earlier on, it's just about that choice. Just making that choice day to day, and it just has a huge impact.
Yeah.
On everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you do in your role is induct volunteers into the foundation as well. So if somebody wanted to volunteer with the foundation through you, what kind of things could they expect? Like, what kind of things would they be doing with the organisation? What kind of opportunities are there for them to get involved in the kind of work that you do?
So it's really wide ranging. So, I mean, some of the work that we do is going off on campaign, going to places like the Faroe Islands and Iceland and these other places, unfortunately having to quite often witness the slaughter of whales and dolphins and these other marine mammals and animals. But if that's a little bit too graphic for you and you don't really necessarily want to get involved in that part of it, there's lots of other work that can be done. Lots of really good grassroots, simple work that you can do. So we have a campaign called the Coastal Debris Campaign, which is effectively beach cleaning. So quite often, every weekend, different parts of the UK, our volunteers get together and we'll pick a beach and we'll clean it. We'll take all the plastic off it, get everything out of the way. But you don't have to be a volunteer to do that. If you see that on our social media, you can just come along. And that's a real good way of just kind of like starting to meet the volunteers and kind of getting a bit of an idea of what goes on. And obviously you can meet us, you can talk to us, we can tell you about the organisation. But we'd also just expect volunteers to do things like outreach and talk to people about what we do, organise talks, places where we can go and we'll have a voice and we can stand up. We're quite keen on getting into schools and talking to young kids about kind of like their choices and how it affects the oceans. So we'll leave out all the graphic stuff with the kids, and we'll just talk more about single-use plastics and how that affects the ocean and that kind of thing, and just about, again, choices, So there's so much for people to do, and it's such a huge task, but we're all very dedicated. And yeah, I would advise anybody who's interested in getting involved just to go have a look at our website, and if they want to volunteer, the contact details are on there and they can drop us a message, or if they want to speak to me directly, they can find me on Facebook or Instagram, or they can email me at northeast@cpwf.org.uk. It's a new email address, so bear with me. And I'll, I can get back to them and we can have a bit of a chat about what goes on. So it's a great organisation. It's a really good way to kind of get into environmental work. We don't ask people to be vegan. We don't ask for any of that. We just ask for you to come and be dedicated and to want to make a difference. And, we'll bring you in, we'll induct you. And then, if you decide 6 months down the line it's not for you, then that's fair enough. But we do have kind of like a core of people that have been around for years, and we're all very close, and we've all seen some awful things together, but we've also done some absolutely amazing things together, and that really bonds people, and there's people that that's in the organisation that, we've stood and unfortunately witnessed mass slaughters together, and these are people that will always be in my life, even if at some point down the line the foundation is not in my life, those people still will be, but the way I see it is I will continue to do it until my body goes, you cannot do this anymore, so I can't ever see a time where I'm fit enough to do it, but not doing it. I will just always carry on while ever I'm able. And I am getting to the point in my life now where I'm picking up injuries a bit easier. And, I'll come away from, when I get home from campaign weekends, or, sometimes it can be a few weeks at a time, I'm in a sorry state when I get back, but I'll just carry on doing it, because as awful as it is, and as much as I've seen some horrible things, I love the organisation. I love the people in it, and these people inspire me every day, and they motivate me to keep going every day. And I have some of them I would literally give my life for, and I think they would say the same.
It's interesting you said that, because I was actually, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is that you're exposed to a lot of real life that people are generally sheltered from, a lot of destruction and, real horrible experiences, that generally people, it's behind closed doors, isn't it, in slaughterhouses and stuff. People don't tend to see it, but you see that reality. And I was actually going to ask you kind of how you emotionally handle that. And it seems like your connection to these other people that are going through it with you is kind of what helps get you through those experiences.
Absolutely. And, especially when we're doing the inductions, and, when we are doing the inductions, we do show some pretty graphic images, because that's the reality of the organisation, the reality of the world that we kind of work within. And quite a lot of people say to me, oh my God, like, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to handle that situation. But I thought the same when I first joined. But you enter like a bit of a work mode, and it's like, right, this is what I'm here to do, and this is what I'm here to get done. So, I've unfortunately seen dolphins slaughtered in Japan, and I've seen them slaughtered in the Faroe Islands. I've seen whales in Iceland, and you always kind of just, the adrenaline takes over, and it's kind of like, right, I've got a job to do. And then the good thing about being part of this organisation is when it's, everything's done and all the work you need to do is done, you're with people that understand what you're going through. And as much as, you've got these horrible images in your head, not only the crew that you're there with help you through it, but you've got all those people back home that will help you get through it. So we have kind of like regional chats on Facebook with all local volunteers and stuff like that. And if somebody's out there, the rest of the people in your area will know that you're out there. So when this kicks off, they'll be like, are you all right? Do you need to talk? Blah, blah, blah. So there's just loads of support. There's lots and lots of support from some absolutely phenomenal people. And it's what gets you through. Yeah, it's what gets you through. I mean, there is people that do go to these places as independents, and I often think to myself, that's pretty hardcore to be out there on your own, But luckily, there's lots of like-minded people to kind of carry the burden with you.
Yeah, and it's such a worthwhile thing to put yourself through for, I think, as well. If there wasn't an aim that was going to be helping those animals, it would have been, I imagine, a really difficult thing to put yourself in a position to do. But you're there for a reason. You're there, you're working towards a purpose. And as horrible as it is, I guess you've always got that and the people around you to come back to when things feel hard.
Yeah, and, the way I kind of look at it is, I'm probably not going to be able to stop these animals dying, but I'm going to show the world that this is what's happening. And even if, that pod of whales being wiped out, or that pod of dolphins being wiped out, if it's just one footstep towards the ultimate goal, then that's the positive that you have to take out of it. You know, that they're not going to die in vain, because people are going to see these images, and people are going to. Some people, the light will switch on in some people's heads that this isn't right. And, you know, some of the pictures that I've taken and some of the pictures that other volunteers in the organisation have taken have ended up in newspapers on the other side of the world, you know. And so to think, you know, that, yeah, as awful as it is, we might have lost a pod of 50 pilot whales or 100 pilot whales, but that might have opened the eyes of 1,000 people. You know, and that's the way that personally I have to look at it, that it's a small step on a long road, but every step gets you closer to that goal.
I think that's such a healthy way of looking at it. I think it's the only way that you can look at it and still be productive and have an impact and do positive things, seeing it as a step towards your ultimate goal of that never happening again.
Yeah, exactly.
Ever, you know.
And it definitely is, you know, creating much more of a buzz than it used to do. So if we take like the Faroe Islands campaign, which is called Operation Bloody Fjords, if we take that as like a bit of a benchmark, back in kind of 2018 when we started going back there, we was out there with a crew of just a couple of people, and we were out there on our own, and we had no interest from the outside world. We were just there doing what we do. But as years have gone on, we're starting getting joined by documentary film crews, and the BBC have come out with us, and, you know, kind of, so the word is getting out there that this is going on. Yeah, and that's kind of like, that's just from the hard work of people putting themselves through that and just trying to get the word out there. And, you know, now every time there is a grind, as it's called now, which is a slaughter of pilot whales or dolphins, it's getting into the newspapers, you know, so, and it's affecting tourism in a country that depends very heavily on tourism. And like you said before, money is what it's all about, isn't it? And if, you know, the Faroese government start to lose income through tourism, at some point the government will go, right, got to stop this now because our reputation is getting destroyed, you know. And if you Google the Faroe Islands now, you'll see some absolutely beautiful pictures of rolling hills and waterfalls and these gorgeous little villages, but you'll also see lots of pictures of dead cetaceans, you know. So that's the only way we can kind of win this fight, really, is by turning people away from their shores.
It's wonderful that the work that you're doing is starting to have an impact, and I think that's absolutely fantastic that you're actually starting to see people waking up to what's happening and seeing the realities of the devastation that these acts cause. You know, and I hope that I'm sure it will continue to grow and escalate that impact that the work that you do has. So I wonder if, before we kind of wrap up, if there's any words of wisdom, insights, knowledge, guidance, advice that you would want to share with anyone that's listening.
I mean, I would basically say that, you know, when I had this light bulb moment kind of like 12 years ago, that I wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? I wasn't this part of this omnipotent species that, you know, are above and beyond everything else. And I started to think about my own place within everything. It was the best decision I ever made. I see the world in a much different way now, and I think I see it with a lot more clarity than the vast majority of people do. I kind of see much more where we should fit in the world. And I'm not one of these people who will, you know, try and shock people into being vegan. I'm not one of these people that will bombard people with horrific images. And I would just ask people to do their own research and go into it with an open mind. Don't kind of think, you know, I've been told by the advertising industry all my life that, you know, meat is important. Just kind of have a bit of an objective look, do your own research, have a look at, you know, Captain Paul Watson Foundation's website and the work that we're doing. but also just, look at some documentaries about a plant-based lifestyle. You know, there's lots of documentaries out there on Netflix. So you've got like Game Changers, Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, you know, Land of Hope and Glory, Earthlings, and all these documentaries that are out there that just try and give you a little bit of perspective about humanity's rightful place in the ecosystem, not this spot that we've ordained ourselves with. So, yeah, that would be my kind of like words of wisdom, if you like. I would just do a bit of research and be open-minded. And I can't imagine anybody watching those documentaries and doing research online and coming away thinking, I'm fine as I am. You know, there's got to be something in there that will make you think, actually, that guy with the Yorkshire accent on that podcast has got a point. You know, so I would definitely just say do your own research. You know, we're not the gods of the planet, but in any way, shape, or form, we're one of the most destructive species that the planet's ever had the displeasure of being involved with, but we don't have to be that way. We could be the planet's greatest creation, but at the moment, we're kind of its worst nightmare. So yeah, just do some research, have a look around, and remove your own ego out of the situation and do what's right. That's what I'd say.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that anyone listening to that guy with the Yorkshire accent hears something in what you've said today, because I think you've shared some absolutely wonderful points, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and what you do. You know, it's such valuable and meaningful work, and I hope that you find whatever you need to just keep going with it, because you know every animal life that you save is an absolute blessing for the world, I think. So I hope that you continue to do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has to have something in their life that gives their life meaning, and I think what better way than to try and help the one and only planet, the one and only life support system that you've got.
Absolutely. It's vital.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Phil, for taking the time to come and be here. And I'll share some links for how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about the volunteering and the beach cleaning. And yeah, just following kind of what you're up to and stay in touch. And it would be lovely to have you on again in the future as well for just regular updates on where you're at and what you're doing.
Anytime you like.
Awesome. Right, thank you. Well, take care and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Bye.
Bye.